quite clear to me that the world is undergoing an extraordinary set of challenges when it comes to human capital development. We're seeing an incredible period of globalization, an even more incredible period of technological innovation, and that's changing completely the nature of companies, the way that organizations operate, the way that they recruit and develop people, and it's also changing business models very, very rapidly. So we need to rethink the way that we're recruiting people. We need to think more clearly about the way that we develop them, and we need to think, again, how you keep bringing people on, how you keep training them and retraining them to deal with a world that is changing at an extraordinary speed. These are all really monumental challenges. I think many of you might be pleased to think, and rightly think, that this is putting human resources right at the center and human resource professionals right at the center of the modern corporation. And really the theme today will be what strategies can human resource departments adopt to develop and maximize what is, after all, the crucial resource that we're all trying to deal with. Today, we're going to start off with the question of labor pains, the changing economics of talent. We're going to have a very general look at economics and how they're changing the big structural forces which are changing the nature of organizations. And I'm very pleased to tell you that we have William McNabb, the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard, and Andrew Benett, Global President of Havas Worldwide. We're going to talk with both of those gentlemen for the next 30 minutes about labor pains, the changing economics of talent. Thank you. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The first thing I'd like to ask you about is the changing pressures on companies. I want to start off by asking you about technology. We do seem to be living through a period of extraordinary technological innovation, and I wonder if I could ask you how you think this is reshaping your company, but also how it is giving your company tools to improve human resource management. So, William, I'd like to start with you. How is the financial services sector and your sector within that sector being changed by technology?
Well, Adrian, for the audience's sake, just a quick background. So
yeah.
we do mutual funds. We serve about 10 million families domestically and lots of clients globally. And if you think about the role of technology in the provision of investment services to people, it's really changed pretty profoundly. Today, 70% of our contact with our clients comes through the web, and that's a big change. So if I went back 15 years ago and I looked at our workforce, I'd say 70% were either phone center or clerical. So, taking calls from clients and processing work were the majority, and then the leadership team, in a sense, had to manage that. So it's almost like a big manufacturing plant, but on the service side. Fast forward to today, about 25% of our workforce is clerical or phone center, and 75% would be in business development, client service, technology, and so forth. So the whole nature of the workforce has
huge
changed.
Upgrading of the workforce there.
Huge change. And, just to put some numbers on it, in 2000, so not quite 15 years ago, but we had about between 11 and 12,000 people working for us. We had about $500 billion under management. Today we have 14 to 15,000 people, so an increase in headcount, but not dramatic. But we have $2.5 trillion under management. And I think, as you know, over the last period, that has not all been due to markets. There's been quite a bit of growth there. And so the nature of the workforce has changed pretty dramatically. Technology has allowed us to scale. But it's brought, it's really created a lot of different needs in terms of our leadership team, in terms of how you manage differently than a lot of us sort of grew up with.
So give me a sense of how it's changing your management. Is it putting more emphasis on selecting a particular sort of person or on upgrading people once you've selected them?
Yeah, so, I would say there have been two big changes. One, in the selection certainly is a huge issue. So you have to be much more selective. We find ourselves on different college campuses and different graduate school campuses than we were 15 years ago. We've had to develop programs to actually attract the best and brightest from those schools, which again was a big change from 15 years ago. The other huge change has been the way we go about development. So 15 years ago, our training programs were pretty basic, and most of them were outsourced. Today, we have Vanguard University on campus, and we run about 1,000 courses per year. All of our people spend, anywhere from 40 to 80 hours, a year in training, depending on what your level is and where you are in your career progression. It may be a lot more. We've even brought in, I should have said we're headquartered in Philadelphia, which is one of the great education centers. We have 108 universities within 2 hours of us. So we've linked up with a number of schools for advanced degrees. We actually offer an MBA on campus. And again, if you took me back 15 years ago, I wouldn't have predicted we would do that. But the needs of the people and the need to keep up with the changing technology in particular has probably driven more of that than anything.
So technology is changing the way that you interact with your customers. Most of your business is now coming over the internet, customers involved with your company like that. How is technology changing your internal organization, the way that you perhaps train people, develop people, manage your workforce?
So, a couple of aspects of that. In terms of training, historically, again, when we began rolling out Vanguard University, probably 80% of the courses were physical. We're now actually doing about half of our courses online because we've got people, all around the country and actually all around the globe. And so even in Vanguard University, the skill set has changed. We're having somebody who was I used to be a teacher, so I used to love to stand up and, do the chalkboard thing. Now we need people who can design courses online and make them interactive and create really rich experiences. And so it's even changed the nature of our Vanguard University personnel quite a bit. Again, much more web development and so forth. The other thing, the other aspect of technology though for us is it's allowed us to do a lot more. One of the things, we have aspirations of being a leader around the globe, and frankly the technology is what allowing us to maintain our culture, maintain our brand as we open up offices. If you go back 15 years ago, we had one office outside of the United States. Today we're in 14 different countries. We have clients in 80 different countries, and the ability to leverage our technology is really making that possible.
And how is this technological revolution, this upgrading of the sort of skills that you require, how is that changing the HR function within your company?
Well, it changes the way you think about, we already mentioned recruiting, it changes the way we think about development. And frankly, it's put some real challenges in front of the group. One of the things you and I actually talked about in sort of our pre-work is, women in leadership. 15 years ago was not on our radar. Today is actually one of the hot topics because we were advancing the organization, we noticed a drop-off in the number of women opting to stay in the leadership roles. 15 years ago it was pretty proportional, but as we moved more into technology, heavy-duty technology-based solutions, more technical areas, many women opted for individual contributor roles as opposed to leadership, and that's put a huge stress on the organization because, frankly, our leadership pipeline's not broad enough and deep enough.
Interesting. Now, William, could you say a little bit about your company and then tell us how technology is working? Yes, when I say William, I meant to say Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew Benett, yeah.
So Havas Worldwide's a global communications company, marketing services, around 10,000 plus people in 80 or so countries. So I think vis-a-vis technology, for us, the challenge is, if you think about what marketing services is as an industry, broadly speaking, it is essentially consulting for our clients in a range of topics, whether it's making communications, whether it's developing products for them. So for us, technology not only has revolutionized every aspect of our business, but when you bring it back to the core of what we do and our people, the recipe for success or failure for us is our people's ability to lead from the front and to understand what's next. And so if I look at our business, 5 years ago, and I look at kind of the world of marketing where we exist 5 years ago, it's more different now than it has been, over any decade, going back the last 50 years.
So you'd say you're really in the middle of the biggest sort of transition in the nature of your business that we can remember, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And every year that becomes exponentially more. So I think, conversations we would have had with clients, who essentially for us are, everywhere from Fortune 50 to Fortune 5 companies, around big tech platforms, Facebook, Google, Twitter, you name it. The conversations are so much deeper today around platforms that many people have never heard of before, but will be the next rising platform.
So what does this mean for talent? The sort of people you're recruiting and the way that you retrain them? Because surely if this world is changing at the speed you're saying, you're going to have to retrain people massively.
Yeah, so I think there's two things. I think the sort of people, ours has always been an industry that has attracted curious people. The difference today...
Curious in what sense?
All aspects, a global view, curiosity.
Oh, that's what curiosity is.
It's a creative industry, so people that like to think about things. I think the biggest difference today versus in the past is the need for people who really have a passion for technology. And it's not a passion, it's not people who know how to, and in their free time, code on their own. But it's people who are using Instagram, or people who, were playing with Vine before Vine became something that marketers started to use. So I think there is that kind of innate curiosity around technology.
And how would you tell that in the selection process?
Well, we have ways that we kind of, we screen for against our vision, against our values. Right. So there is certain skills-based criteria that we look for. There's also cultural fit-based criteria that we look for. So I think that's certainly where we see it now, where we see it going. I think, in terms of our people and how we then develop them further, similar to Bill, it has enabled a totally different way of training. Is the more formal training or informal training? How do you institutionalize this keeping up with technological innovation? There's both. So there's what we are trying to institutionalize now is almost credits for self-directed learning, because I think a large portion of corporate learning is directed learning, and I think the technology space really does mandate a lot of self-directed learning. It requires people to get out there and play with technology on their own. So we're looking at ways that we can institutionalize that, monitor that, measure that, and then reward that. We're also looking at building new platforms, things like what the Khan Academy has done for learning, where we can be much more nimble and agile in developing new training modules and rolling it out in beta and then globally.
Are you trying to create internal Khan Academies?
Things similar to that, yes, because our feeling is we can't, and we have Havas University, we have similar things to large corporations. We do leadership development programs with Wharton and other business schools. All great things, but they're points in time. Our belief on training is that, almost like technology, where if you think of the best technology companies or agile software technology companies, they live in perpetual beta. That's how we're trying to have our workforce live, in a state where things are never complete. Yes, the final deliverable for what we're working on needs to reach a point of completion, but their own development can never be complete. So
training isn't just a function. Training is something people do all the time. So you have to select people who are of that sort, who are going to be constantly upgrading their talents naturally rather than being asked to do so.
Yes, and I think that's almost today the easier part for us in our industry, because we have a younger average age in our industry. So you get the millennial into the kind of trailing Gen X, where it becomes almost intuitive to them. So when you look at the kind of boomer segment of our workforce, the challenge for us is to have them have this broader view about technology, the importance of it, and not just the skills, but the interest in it, so that they can then manage their own teams and their own workforce.
So, Andrew, I wanted to stick with you and shift the topic of conversation to the other great structural force, which is changing our economy and the talent world, and that's globalization. Mm-hmm. The massive shift in economic power to the emerging world, and particularly China and Asia. How is that changing your business? How is that changing the sort of people you're recruiting? And how do you manage a much more diverse global workforce?
Right. So I think, we've been a global company for decades. So we have 300 and some odd offices around the world. So for us, and most of our clients are large global corporations. So it's not, for our business, it's not a matter of becoming global. It's more, what does the global landscape look like? What is the impact for our clients? And then what is the impact for our workforce? So to make it specific, the notion of diversity is quite interesting. So we see a big shift right now in our client organizations going from a centralized model to a decentralized model. So I think 5 to 10 years ago, you had many marketing and sales organizations in specifically Fortune 100 companies that had much more of a centralized model. And then it would be pushed out from a center, wherever.
So that's trying to sell the same product to people right around the world, really, is it?
To a certain extent, it's also how the company manages themselves.
Yes,
it doesn't even have to do with the selling of the product, it has to do with the organizational structure of the company. What we're seeing now is number one, a greater sensitivity to a broader worldview, and I think it's impossible to escape the fact that that's just pervasive. And the implication for our business is that the diversity of thinking needs to be baked in everywhere. And I think it would be hard to argue that one does not get better thinking through diversity, all sorts of diversity, ethnic, age, gender, experience. So very practically in our business, where we have global, we call them global brand teams, we look for, and regardless of whatever country, on whatever continent they reside in, we look to have in that team, in that center, as much diversity as possible.
So this greater emphasis on decentralization, country managers and the rest of it, this greater emphasis on cultural diversity, what does that mean for the HR function? What sort of concrete challenges are HR professionals facing in that world?
I think the ability, you are putting together, because our HR professionals are truly in our best agencies around the world, business partners to the CEOs of our agencies, and are engaging in everything, not just the kind of core HR functions from acquisition to development to retention, all of the great things that come out of the function, but are truly business partners. And so I think the biggest challenge for them is, how do I create a mosaic? How do I put pieces together that might not, at the first blush, or might not look like it fits together as a perfect puzzle, but actually it does. And when you put that puzzle together, it's a much more interesting puzzle.
So the puzzle is becoming much more complicated.
Much more complicated, much more beautiful too.
William, the same question to you, really. The way that globalization is changing your business, the financial profession, and the way that you go about recruiting people and managing a very and diverse workforce.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I can't tell whether it's the biggest change, including technology or not, but they're certainly going to be on an equal footing. We started out, as I said, 15 years ago. We had one overseas office. It was in Australia, and really the reason we went.
Did you find the Australians difficult to manage?
Actually, just to the contrary. But to show you how much strategy went into picking Australia. Actually, the guy who hired me decided he wanted to go home, and he was going to go work for Frank Russell or one of our other competitors. And our then CEO said, "Why don't you start Vanguard Australia?" We gave him a satellite phone and a little bit of capital and a PC, and he built this great business for us. We got a little bit lucky that Australia was a good place to be at that time. Right. But the interesting for us, the progression globally actually started with, I would say, the evolution of the capital markets, which is very, a little bit different, I think, than other people's business. If you went back 15 years ago, 60, 70% of the market cap globally was U.S. And so as an investor, you really didn't need, it was nice to have international exposure, but it wasn't essential. Today, that number has flipped. And so to be a well-diversified investor, you actually need tremendous global exposure. So for us, it began actually as an investment equation. We need to get our US-based clients much more exposure overseas to overseas investment. So we built out that function. And then really the financial crisis really has accelerated regulatory change around the world. And in a sense, our way of doing business is much more appealing than it was 10 years ago.
But surely this is creating a huge amount of competition for talent if these big financial companies are suddenly seizing on these new markets.
It is, and one of the things you see, depending on whether you're in London or Hong Kong or Singapore, some of the big global investment centers, you see people who you see a lot more job hopping than you see in the U.S. You see much more turnover. And actually, our turnover, we're a very low turnover firm. We like to get people and keep them for an entire career. So, we're running at 6 or 7% turnover, including our entry level, which, is extraordinary in the financial services world. So, when we go overseas, we want to have that same.
And how do you deal with job hopping in Hong Kong?
So in the hiring process, we're actually looking for people who not only have the skill sets that we need, but who actually get what we're trying to do culturally and philosophically. We're a very long-term oriented investment shop. And so we're trying to get people who buy into that philosophy, and it's hard. When we opened our London office, we sent one of our most talented and experienced leaders to start the office, and he hired a phenomenal British woman to head up HR. And they have, the two of them have interviewed every single candidate to come through the office in the last 5 years. And so you think it's in the thousands at this point. We have about a 300-person office in London. And to get there, you had to go through, a couple thousand people. And the two of them have literally interviewed everybody. And that's how much importance we put on that. Now, is that scalable? If London grows from 300 to 3,000, they're probably not going to interview every single candidate who comes through. But we thought it was that important getting going. And we've basically taken that model to Hong Kong, to Canada, to other places that we're operating.
Now, I've heard the word culture mentioned several times by both of you, and both in terms of the sort of cultural curiosity of the sort of people that you want to recruit and in terms of cultural sensitivity with globalization. Is there any way in which you can measure the cultural qualities of the people you're recruiting and prepare for a good cultural fit? Andrew?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think, just to take a slight step back, I think, we just did a study looking at across some of the most well-regarded companies in the world with regards to talent, how they manage their talent, and what one of the kind of more surprising insights was the uniformity of the importance of cultural fit. Yeah. Now, you would expect that from Silicon Valley companies, you'd expect it from terrific, organizations like Vanguard, where there is a strong culture and where it's incredible, or JetBlue we spoke to. I didn't expect it to be in the 90+ percentile of people that we spoke to. So I think, point one, it's mission critical. You can always, you have to assume that you're going to be recruiting people who can deliver the skills, and those that can't obviously fall out of the process. So that cultural fit piece becomes important. We're doing some work right now with Connexa, which is an IBM company and kind of powers the whole IBM Smarter Workforce play. And they've got some very interesting tools that can essentially pre-screen for cultural fit. And I think the tools are there, and that's before an applicant even goes to the interview. You can, more and more companies now are on their job portals putting a couple of questions, 5 to 10 questions, that you can then answer yourself, get the answers back yourself, and get a sense of whether you are a cultural fit for that company. So I think the notion of cultural fit's moving much more upstream in the conversation, is becoming much more important for the applicant pool across industries. So I think while we screen for it, it's a two-way street, the cultural fit piece. I think applicants today care as much about it as employers do, and therefore it's becoming more important.
And William, the same question to you, and then we'll get 5 minutes of questions, I think.
Yeah, so we're doing similar things to Andrew. You try to screen for it. What we have found is, and this is going to sound overly simplistic, but we found actually being pretty explicit about what we're looking for culturally, and have the conversation with people, and basically say, we're not going to be for everybody, and if this sounds like the right kind of fit for you, go for it. If it doesn't, let's part company before we actually get married. And it's
always a good strategy.
It is a good, and it's interesting. I just went through this with two candidates who were coming in from very different firms, and we had a very blunt conversation about that. And one of them said to me, "Why do people fail?" And I said, "Cultural fit is probably the single biggest issue. We get it wrong, and you get it wrong, and it's not fun."
Interesting.
So you try to be pretty blunt about that.
Because we've heard so much about cultural sensitivity in a globalizing world, but not so much about cultural fit, between the company and its workers. A very interesting theme.
I'll just give you one anecdote. I was interviewing somebody for a role, and we were talking about cultural sensitivity and how you needed to be you needed to really think about this wherever we went around the world. And he said to me, he goes, "Our value proposition is really simple. We always want to do the right thing. We want to deliver the highest value, and we want to be very long term." He said, "Those are universal values. They're found in every culture. There's no, in a sense, if we can get people attracted to that, then we're going to be successful."
Great. We have I'm afraid, just 5 minutes for questions.
Given the profound changes, what's different about your management team? What's different about how you work in order to listen to your people, truly listen, and make sure they understand they're being heard?
I think first point would be, and we touched on this, we strive for our management teams to be as diverse as possible. So I think the part of the challenge in our industry is it's not one known for diversity. And I think that there are many industries like that where you then have to go out of your way and you have to have a philosophical belief that you're not looking for diversity for the sake of diversity. And I think that's an important point for me about diversity is diversity yields better outcomes. And so that's why you do it, not for the optics of it. So I think that's why we do it and why we work really hard at it, and quite honestly struggle with it at times. It depends on the market. There are certain markets for us around the world where, I look at our management teams and they're the farthest thing from a picture of diversity. And you have to kind of ask the question why and whether people are really working hard at it. I think in terms of how we then manage, when we have that in place, I think things become a lot easier because it is night and day in terms of the difference, and we see it in the results of our businesses. Businesses that have a more diverse management team have better results. And so we focus more on the businesses that don't, and how do we help get them there so that they can then manage from that position.
The only thing I would add to it
Go ahead.
is, we're selecting along very similar lines, but we actually happen to be a Gallop client. So rather than Connexa, we use a Gallop engagement score. And we're actually very transparent to the leadership team. I actually get a map every year all the way down to the frontline supervisor of what each team's Gallop score is. And we've actually used this as a way, it's an engagement ratio. And essentially we want to see teams making progress in engagement. And if you're not hitting on all of these variables, you're not going to drive engagement. And we have, absolutely incontrovertible, data to support higher engaged teams produce higher results for clients. I mean, the correlation is perfect. And so for us, we've been able to make the business case to our teams. And so if we'll take two team leaders and we'll look at their engagement scores, and if one is, vastly superior to the other, their business results will be superior. And you have a very good conversation with that. So you can have data to actually support the philosophical perspectives that Andrew was describing.
Question from the gentleman here.
I was curious if you could comment on the change in the impact of technology, in particular in the early phase. I think it's fair to say it's replaced a lot of repetitive tasks and maybe lower value tasks. And now we're seeing other tasks being either enriched or replaced, including the use of artificial intelligence, big data. I wonder if you could comment a little bit about that.
You know, it is, what you describe is happening, and it's happening at light speed, and it really is changing the nature of the workforce. So, you know, my executive team, there are 11 of us total, and almost half spent serious time in the IT group. So we need actually very tech-savvy people just to understand what's going on. So that's sort of, you know, point one. Point two is we've had to make very clear to our employees that ongoing development is as much their responsibility as our responsibility. We will create the platforms for them. But if they don't take that seriously, then they're not going to be able to keep up. So, you know, I mentioned, you know, that we have an internal university. So we have 1,000 people out of 10,000 in the Philadelphia region pursuing advanced degrees right now. We have another 300 pursuing advanced certifications, you know, like the Chartered Financial Analyst or something like that. And frankly, if people aren't doing that, we're not going to be able to keep up. So our job is to provide those platforms, and then, you know, it's a two-way, it's in a sense a two-way street.
Well, William and Andrew, thank you very, very much for providing us both with a big overview and lots of details about what you're doing yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.